Guys, I'm caught at a crossroads here. For the sake of people actually watching this thing, I want to talk about this movie while it's still in everyone's purview, but really, I just feel lost on where to even start with this film. Like, literally, what angle am I even supposed to begin this video from? Do I hit the subject of the fanbase first? I was tempted to, rip it off like a band-aid, but with just how extreme the online discourse about this movie has gotten, that seems like it would actually be more akin to slowly peeling off a ceremonial duct tape mummy wrap. So you know what, I'm gonna take a cue from this movie's own themes and do what's ultimately the safest thing for myself long term, which in this case means bubbling my own opinion off from the rest of the world in any discussion about wider fan response. That said, I'm still a stickler for putting things in context, so allow me this short tangent while I set the stage for my own relationship with the Star Wars movies as a whole. The last time I talked about Star Wars on this channel was actually with two of the first videos I ever did, where I reviewed The Phantom Menace and The Force Awakens around the time of the latter's release. The Phantom Menace review was supposed to be the first of a look at the whole prequel trilogy, but I ended up putting that on indefinite hold when I lost the Attack of the Clones review just as all the audio and video editing had been finished. Needless to say, that was pretty demoralizing. A lot has changed since then. My audio quality no longer sounds like I stuffed my mic in a garbage disposal, hopefully. I no longer bother with number grades on anything I review. I've turned my videos into a more collaborative process, and I like to think that my critical faculties have sharpened a little bit. All that said, I largely stick with what I said in those two videos. I still think the prequels are
flaming crap mixed with garbage,
and my ability to see positives in them sadly only makes it more cathartic to tear apart the final product. I still like a lot of The Force Awakens, but over 2 years that movie keeps bouncing like a pinball between really good and just kinda okay in my mind. Since that film, Rogue One has come out, and I have pretty much the exact same feeling towards that movie. I've said this before, but I'm just not a Star Wars fan in the way most others are. I acknowledge the original trilogy as two indisputable classics and one pretty good finale, the way that it seems most fans do, but this just isn't a franchise that's got a particularly special place in my heart. That's where I am on this series, so when I don't react to certain aspects of The Last Jedi the way most die-hard fanatically invested types do, I don't want there to be any confusion as to why. Jill Barrett, in her video on this movie, described The Last Jedi as the Avengers Age of Ultron of Star Wars films. And when I say I agree with that assessment 100%, that should be all anyone who knows me needs to hear to understand how I felt about it. The Last Jedi is jam-packed, stuffed to the brim with characters, action, ideas, some of which might be laid on too thick, and some of which might be too subtle or nuanced for their own good. Goofy comedic beats, dark comedic beats, totally straight dramatic beats, plot points, visuals, and that's not even getting into just how long it is. This is a movie that very specifically has 4 acts instead of 3. It's just, there's so much, and I love it. I love this movie. I rank it over every other Star Wars related thing I've ever watched, no hyperbole. I liked Force Awakens and especially Rogue One a whole lot at the time of release, and I still do, I think, but since they've come out I haven't felt the need to watch each one more than 3 times. The Last Jedi, by contrast, is a movie that I envision myself catching over and over and over again for years to come. The movie takes a break up the Fellowship approach, following 3 distinct plot threads that converge at the end. Tackling them in order of my personal preference, we've got Poe Dameron struggling with Leia and then Vice Admiral Holdo over what to do as the Resistance finds themselves in increasingly dire straits, as the First Order chases what's essentially their last remaining fleet across the galaxy. Poe was a character that we really didn't have much to go on in The Force Awakens. He was absent for much of that film's first and second acts, but I knew I liked him thanks to Oscar Isaac's incredibly charismatic performance. Here that charisma is still in check, but it's paired with a far more fleshed out and very flawed characterization of the guy. It's easy to assume in the last movie that Poe is a guy who has everything he needs to figured out already, but this movie shows just how much growing up he really had to do. Poe is one of the characters with the most profound sense of change over the course of the film, and Leia and Holdo play into it brilliantly. That's not to say that either character exists purely to service Poe's arc, though. Laura Dern and Carrie Fisher are great. The studio should especially count themselves lucky that they managed to get one of Fisher's best performances out of her before she died, given how I honestly found her to be the weak link in The Force Awakens acting-wise. Both Leia and Holdo each get a moment that left me, along with the rest of my theater, in pure awe. Holdo's might even be my favorite shot in the whole franchise. That's up there with the circle shot in Avengers as far as theater moments I'm never going to forget, and exemplifies how, if nothing else, Rian Johnson did wonders for this movie from a cinematography point of view. There's not a single sequence in this film that's visually boring. Our next subplot is one that'll probably leave everyone scratching their heads over why I like it as much as I do. Finn teaming up with new character Rose to help infiltrate the First Order ship and buy the Resistance some time, ultimately lands the two of them in what's admittedly a bit of a plot cul-de-sac, wherein they end up wrecking things in the posh, malevolent casino planet of Canto Bight. As a setting, it's a departure from almost anything else we've seen in these movies. And while I admit that a lot of this plot thread doesn't tie into the main narrative on a cause and effect level, I wouldn't dare get rid of it for everything it contributes to characterization and theme. Plus, and feel free to call me shallow on this point, I kinda like the idea of letting ourselves have a fun little plot digression so long as it furthers character and ideas. This is a series of adventure movies after all, and what's an adventure without some side quests in new colorful locales? John Boyega continues to prove that he can give Finn chemistry with seemingly pretty much anyone. BB-8 is adorable as always, and Kelly Marie Tran as Rose is a great addition. I wouldn't call her my favorite character, if only because everyone is handled so dang well here, but she's absolutely someone I look forward to seeing more of in the future. This subplot also introduces us to the character of DJ as played by Benicio del Toro, who to me is one of the most fascinating bit players in the whole franchise. I honestly can't think of the last time I saw a quirky, charming rogue figure in any media that was played exactly the way this guy was to this exact sort of end. The closest point of comparison is maybe Varric from Avatar: The Legend of Korra, but even that example skews in a different direction than what I mean in the end. I also want more of him, but would simultaneously be just as satisfied with what we have right here. In a movie that's partially about just how constricting and soul-numbing the endless conflict of dark versus light, good versus evil can be, the way that we handle a character like DJ in this film is frankly genius. Finally, there's the real central push of the movie, and the thing that I imagine is going to be the make-or-break element for most people. That being Rey training with Luke Skywalker and trying in the process to uncover the reason for her self-imposed exile, how it ties into Kylo Ren, and maybe even the mystery of her own parentage. I was never one to agree with the Rey is a Mary Sue complaints coming off of The Force Awakens. After this film, though, I don't think it's even up for debate. Anyone who continues to act like Rey isn't a flawed, layered character past this point is just being silly. Her role as it pertains to the grand plan to the galaxy, her parents, her place in the conflict of light and dark, and how that reflects on her, is the riskiest decision made in this film, and it's absolutely one of the best things about it. And that's not even getting into her relationship with Luke and Kylo Ren. We're fundamentally changing the nature of the series' core motifs with this story, arguably in a bigger way than even the prequels ever did, and I am here for it. Luke Skywalker, like much of the franchise itself, is a character that I like a lot, but don't have an overabundance of emotional stake in. I love the guy, and he was the perfect protagonist for those first 3 movies, but I never had such a connection to him that seeing his character deviate the way it has over the course of these decades would ever bother me. Luke in The Last Jedi is so utterly and completely disenfranchised with himself, the Jedi, the whole narrative of his own story, that he's a perfect mirror for Kylo Ren, whose entire philosophy of burn this sucker to the ground and start from scratch while ignoring the past completely seems to be the defining basis of this series' conflict going forward. Both characters go back and forth from empathetic to very obviously too locked up in their own heads, and between the two of them are multiple moments that are downright applause-worthy. Like, literally my whole theater applauded at pretty much anything either of them did in the 3rd and 4th acts. After having the guy literally kill Han Solo in the last movie, I was certain that any attempt to continue characterizing Kylo as sympathetic or conflicted beyond that point would rub me the wrong way. But almost immediately into he and Rey's scenes together, I was sold. Kylo Ren, if it wasn't obvious already, is absolutely not the next Darth Vader. No villain in the history of film is ever going to get that iconic, but on the level of actual characterization, I actually have to give it to Kylo over Anakin. Putting aside that Kylo isn't saddled with a trilogy of characterization ruining prequels, he's just so much more interesting to think about. The Last Jedi absolutely is the Age of Ultron of Star Wars, and it's frankly weird for me to be in this exact same position again with another massive franchise. I'm honestly a bit apprehensive to see the franchise back in J.J. Abrams' hands after this film. Not that I don't think Abrams didn't do a good job last time, but he's never made anything I would consider all that risky or bold. And Last Jedi is a capital B bold movie. I'm more excited than I've ever been to see the next chapter of this franchise, and I look forward to viewing this film on its own terms again, and again, and again, and again. I wish I could say it's a movie that will be better appreciated by the masses with time, but I've been wrong about that kind of thing before. I guess I'm just gonna have to settle for letting it be a movie that worked for me and got me really into this series' future for the first time. In short, no Lando, 0 out of 10.